Hey folks, Malforian here, and today we're taking a look at the Economy Part 2 Dev Diary for Millennia. Now, they covered the first half of this, I think it was about 2 Dev Diaries ago. As always, I've got a playlist on the channel if you want to catch up to how far we are at the moment, but that was like a more general overview of how the economy worked. This Dev Diary is going to give us a pretty in-depth look at it. There's some really good examples in this of exactly how these economy systems will work, especially the production trees and things like that. They cover that in some detail. So we're not going to waste any time. We're just going to get straight into it. And as you can see here, first they're going to talk about capital buildings, and each region has a capital city. Within that capital, you can construct capital buildings, which they've talked about before. These are buildings that can do a variety of things for your nation. They give different bonuses and things like that. So it's cool for us to get a little bit more information on those. So capital buildings really aren't direct contributors to the economy at the good line level. So the actual goods themselves, in that they do not typically generate any goods themselves. There are exceptions. The Scholar's National Spirit allows you to build a capital building that produces books, for example, but in general, capital buildings represent more the overall infrastructure of a region, so basically how you improve other goods trees and things like that, rather than doing them themselves. That infrastructure takes some time to set up. Capital buildings are built by the capital, pretty obviously, using production generated at the capital, so there is a time component involved, so it sounds like you can't bolster these from other places in your empire. You've just got to build them in the capital of that region with the actual capital itself. Capital buildings can have requirements related to the region. If you're in the age of rocketry, you want to build a foreign office capital building, it will require a region level of 3. So you can't jump ahead and build one of these in a low level region, start a new region and then immediately build one of these really high tech buildings. You are going to have to level that region up and not just kind of spam them out, I guess. I suppose this is to combat somewhat playing wide, maybe too much, to like too big an extent, so you can't found new regions and then immediately have them helping you in a space race or something, because obviously those regions would take a little bit of time to catch up to the rest of your empire, which is a pretty cool mechanic. I like it. It'd be interesting to see exactly how it plays out, but I do like the idea that you found a new city and it can't immediately build things that your like original regions can build. I think that could be a pretty cool way to go. A region's region level can be increased in a number of ways. Building a town in the region increases its level by 1, as does leveling a town already in the region. Certain capital buildings like the food stockpile in the Stone of Age or an aqueduct in the Age of Iron also increase region level, so it's not going to be too difficult by the looks of it. You can just build these certain things, or build a town, level that up. Obviously more people living there is going to level up the actual region itself that they're in. And then here we have a nice screenshot of most of the buildings you can build. A lot of obvious stuff: holy sites, museums, Academy of Science. They've got a telegraph office, they've got a university, and then it looks like upgrades to sports stadiums and all these other things, banking, upgrade to sewers, grocery stores. So some buildings you can build, and then it looks like you can basically level up those buildings as well. And there's obviously diplomacy XP. They talked about this last week, I think. Certain buildings will give you XP in certain areas of your domain. So martial XP, diplomacy XP, depending on what the buildings do themselves. So it looks like the foreign office obviously gives you diplomacy XP. That makes sense contextually, obviously, as well. They're building a tower crane, or they just finished it. You get a nice little picture of your city itself. You got a propeller bomber and a main battle tank being potentially built up here as well. So it's obviously some of the martial stuff that you can build. Overall, this arrangement creates a development curve for regions that feels somewhat realistic. As we were just saying, you cannot plunk down a newly built capital city in the Age of Information and set it to build universities and smart grids and the internet backbones. These things will need people and infrastructure beyond what a shiny new population capital represents. And as I said, let me know what you think in the comments down below, but I think that's such a cool way of doing it, so you can't just really blob out at speed near the end and just be doing all this high-tech stuff. Those areas obviously need people and economies built up and things like that. So again, I really like how that's going to look. Returning more to the question on how capital buildings participate in the overall economy, the infrastructure they represent does involve economic output. Most capital buildings do not produce goods, as I've already mentioned, but a grocery store does create food for a region, an investment bank produces wealth, a public library generates knowledge, and a police department provides unrest suppression, and so on. Pretty obviously, if you played any of these Forex games, as we say quite a lot on these videos, these things aren't going to be like a big surprise to you. A bank gives you more money, a grocery store gives you more food. Overall, a capital building in a region define a baseline output for that region. The components in this aren't scalable. You can't build 12 of the same building in one region. You can only build one of them by the looks of it, and maybe upgrade that one. You can't just build 12 of the same thing. And taking the time to build them competes with training units, running projects, but they require no input goods, no additional territory, and no assigned workers. They represent a broad economic activity of a region, so I can see how these can be balanced if you're trying to specialize in certain kind of production maybe in a region. You can build these buildings and they don't cost you anything. Obviously time and some other things as well, but they don't actually cost you goods to import. They don't take up extra land on the map. They don't require workers to actually work in there, but they obviously require some resources to build. But then after that, they basically just give you an output for nothing, if you want to think of it that way. And they kind of guide how you want to build that region. And then next we're going to get on to improvements. Improvements are somewhat the opposite of a capital building, both mechanically and thematically. Where capital buildings represent general economic activity in a region, improvements represent a specific industry or projects. Unlike capital buildings, improvements are built in specific tiles, so they require land within a region and an expansion of borders over time if you want to support more of them. If you do not have enough space, you can be limited in the number of improvements you can consider. Some improvements also require certain types of terrain. You cannot build fishing boats in a forest. I mean, watch me try. I'm going to try it. Obviously, it isn't possible, but I do like that example that they've give, which will further alter your plans. Again, like most 4X games, you're putting down a region and you're thinking, okay, there's a lot of forests here. I'm going to build some sawmills or something like that. Oh, there's a lot of hills. Maybe I'll focus this region on mining. You can't really do everything. Although, as it says, I think if your region's big enough, you could kind of do everything if you wanted to play tall. If you could expand it enough, you could probably get, a little bit of ocean, a little bit of mountain, a little bit of forestry, a little bit of arable land, and kind of do everything kind of good. Whereas I think the idea is for regions is to try and specialize a couple of them into different things. And obviously together, they kind of make your empire better than if you tried to do everything in one place. That is how it seems to read anyway. Improvements also need workers. Capital buildings do not, as they talked about before. If something happens to reduce your population, or if you construct more improvements than a region can support, some of the improvements can go idle. So there we go. Population is going to take an actual effect in your cities. Not like civilization, where if you build a factory, it just always works no matter what. Your population doesn't matter. If you had a city that was size 12 with a factory and, the Ruhr Valley or something, if that city gets knocked down to like size 4, those improvements still do what they do. They don't get worse or anything like that. There's no scaling production. Whereas in this, there is. They can go idle if you don't have enough people. I'm not sure how that's going to work. They'll probably get into it. Where capital buildings are built from a region's production, improvements are placed with improvement points. In later ages, with more advanced economies, specialists replace IP for building certain improvements. So it looks like you need these specialist units to build certain things. I wonder if you need some kind of like tech person to do internet stuff, some kind of university taught rocketeer to do the rocket stuff and things like that. Unlike production, improvement points is a shared national level resource. This creates very different possibilities for building improvements compared to capital buildings. For example, you can focus improvement points from all sources on one region if you want to, and if you've saved enough improvement points, you can immediately place multiple improvements with one region. So that is quite a good strategy there. You can, as it says, just focus everything in one region, or do you want to space out your improvement points around different regions, or do you save up your improvement points, have this region, again, let's say with hills, it's got coal, it's got iron. Do you just save up a bunch of improvement points and then suddenly like smash them into there and basically build a mine, build a smelting place, build a factory, and then basically go from like no industry to like an industrial powerhouse in that region? Maybe it's a region you think you might lose in a war or something, so you don't want to invest in there, but once you've secured it, you can then really kind of hammer in really quick and improve it in like one big go, which is a cool system again. I like that. Economically, improvements are the main machinery around goods. There are exceptions, but generally improvements either generate goods directly, a farm produces wheat, or they convert goods, a mill converting wheat into flour. Buildings and working improvements is thus the primary way to obtain, alter, or improve goods, and therefore defines a great deal of your economic capability. And they talked about this, I think, in the launch dev diary, or maybe it was one of the very early ones. They did talk about how this game is really built on certain pillars. The ages is obviously one of them, the national spirits is another, and then this full like integrated goods system where you actually convert things with different buildings and stuff like that that do different outcomes. And then here, this is where they're going to go into an example. This is a really good example. This is going to be in the age of rocketry, which is age 8. Goods like clay, bricks, marble, logs, and planks are important for development during the early ages. Later goods like steel and concrete drive strong development. Metal in general is a flexible good and valuable in the early stages of history. The mining technology in the Age of Bronze allows construction of mine improvements on hill terrain, which produces copper or more valuable iron. Mines and some of the related improvements in the metal goods line get better as technology progresses. The first mines can be upgraded into better mines during the Renaissance, for example. In the Age of Revolution, the steel technology unlocks a new improvement, the steel furnace. So as you progress through these ages, you can upgrade your mines. They're not just static. Build a mine, and then the mine either stays the same or other tech just like adds one production or something to it. This actually substantially increases the production of a mine in this example. Once you have this technology, you want to upgrade your earlier furnaces, probably blast furnaces taken in metal to make ingots, to steel furnaces. These can take in metal ore goods and convert them into steel. Steel is worth substantially more than ingots, and also the steel furnace has more capacity than the older blast furnace. But a more important consideration in most cases is the next step in the goods line. More modern metal-related improvements require steel to operate. So if you don't build these, there's going to be things, I imagine, like battleships or space things or, you know, different kind of technology and improvements that you just can't build. If you don't have steel, you just can't build those. Again, differentiating this from like Civ, where you just have production and production does everything. Now, they do have some resources. You know, you do have steel and things like that in Civ, but it doesn't really lock you out from things that much. It's more around the military is really what gets affected by resources, whereas this is going to affect more than that by the looks of it. If you wanted, you could just work mines, feed the metal gathered into steel furnaces, and add raw production to a region. So you can just have that general production, which would basically just make it a more capable building. However, you can also build a deeper goods line with additional improvements, which allows you to get more from steel or get something other than production. Once in the age of rocketry, for example, you might want to build a machine shop and start feeding steel there to make power tools worth more than production. But maybe you want wealth. If you do, you could instead build a car manufacturer and turn the steel into cars, or maybe you plan to get into some fights. In that case, you build a defense manufacturer and use steel to build missiles. So even getting just steel itself, there's these different branching ways where you can, as it says, you know, do you need production? Do you need gold? Do you need a better army itself? So you can kind of go in these in a general way and then kind of specialize at the end. I would imagine this gives you some flexibility as well. You know, you can have your best laid plans, but if something bad happens, you can kind of pivot. Once you have the steel production, you can change it around a little bit. You have got to obviously build these different buildings instead, but there is a way of doing that. You're not kind of stuck in one production method once you get going by the looks of it. And there we go. We've seen this before. This is the layout of a city. It's showing what goods they have. It's showing the actual tiles that are in the region and the income and the builders. Different goods have different profiles. Some do not require a lot of investment to gather, but aren't very flexible or cannot be improved as much. Others are more expensive, but can be productive or converted into different resources. Speaking to the flexibility of the metal goods line, you might also invest in all the improvements mentioned in the example above, and then move workers and steel around so you can get the most if your situation changed. Well, that's what we were just talking about. A component not mentioned above is the more advanced improvements sometimes require additional needs. For example, steel production requires power, and the more steel furnaces, machine shops, car manufacturers and so on in a region, the more power you will need to supply, which means things like mining coal or petroleum or building wind farms or power grids. You might also decide that the additional infrastructure isn't worth it for your strategy and try and make things work by exploring lower tech strategy, scaling up the cheaper mines and furnaces and foundries of an earlier era. So you can actually, even though you learn the better things, just stay to the older tech. I wonder if that's useful if you're trying like the Mongol scenario from the last dev diary. If you just want to rush the map as quick as you can, yeah, you might build up some of this tech later on, but maybe it's better for you to just keep the older, cheaper technology and just spam out some like slightly worse units, but you can build them faster and cheaper. And yeah, they're not going to be as good, but kind of like the volume of numbers is going to win over a more advanced, smaller army. It looks like that could be a possibility as well. Or even just, you know, I need some money, but I don't want to go all the way down this tech tree of building things. I just want to do the cheap and nasty way, basically, and see how well I do there. And then next we're going to get onto import and export. There's a lot of information in this dev diary. Do let me know if you have any questions down below once you've got through it. Millennia has two types of trade, foreign import and domestic export. Both are governed primarily by various capital buildings that determine capacity. For example, if you build a shopping center capital building in a region, you gain 3 foreign import slots and are able to import up to 3 goods into the region. Foreign import allows you to spend wealth to acquire goods from a world market. In all cases, you can import trade goods which are worth culture. If you have deployed an envoy to a region of another nation and are not at war with them, goods produced in that region are added to the market and available for import. So this is interesting. I'm not exactly sure how this works because it sounds like you can send, as it says, an envoy to a foreign nation, and then the region that the envoy's in, you basically get access, I think, to their materials. Now, I'm guessing you don't just like import them and they then don't have them. I wonder whether it basically, you have this envoy somewhere that has coal. I imagine you can get coal from them in a trade, but then they keep the coal as well. I'm not 100% sure, because you could in theory try and abuse this by sending an envoy to a region and just stealing, well, not stealing, but like trading all their materials, and then they wouldn't have them to do something. Maybe you were thinking of going to war with someone, but you're friends with them. You could send an envoy, say, hey, I'll take all your coal, steel, rockets or something. You're taking them, they don't have them, and then you just turn around and attack them, and they haven't been able to build up something. So it sounds like potentially, if it was, for example, coal, they would keep the coal, but you would also be able to get coal from them in a weird way. It sounds like that's how that would work, because otherwise I'm not sure whether it would make sense, but we'll see. Obviously in the future they'll probably talk about it a little bit more. Foreign import is a useful way for a specific good you've been difficulty finding, or to convert excess wealth into something more valuable. Domestic export is similar, but it involves trade between your regions, essentially sending a good from one place to another. That's like inter-empire trading, basically, sending it from one of your regions to another. You could have a region, as we said earlier, that's really focused on industry. Maybe it's got a lot of coal plants. You have that region making like cars because you just need extra wealth, but maybe you have a region nearby that you're focusing on military. You're sending the excess coal from your gold making region over to your military region, and they're kind of using up the excess to make better tanks or things like that. I think that's how it works by the sounds of it. You can kind of have a resource production region and then kind of export that to your other regions, but you can then nationally trade with other regions from other nations as well if you're in a good enough stead with them. It will be interesting to see how that kind of inter-region in your own empire trade works. It seems a little bit weird because you don't generally see that in Forex games where you're trading within your own kind of nation in a way with how regions work in this game. Yeah, it's going to take a little bit of like thinking about how exactly that's going to work. I'm used to games like Civ again, where if you have coal, basically everywhere has the coal as long as you have enough of it. You don't have to like trade it within your cities and things like that. And then if you have built a container yard capital building in a region, for example, you can gain 3 domestic export slots. So exactly the same as the foreign export trade system works. You build a certain building and then you can export certain things. So in this example here, this is Dusseldorf, obviously the same region as Berlin we were looking at earlier. So this region is foreign importing wood. Maybe they just don't have enough forests. It looks like they do in the picture, but I think it's just an example. And then they're actually exporting domestically the books that give knowledge and luxury to Berlin, which is their capital region. They're taking in resources to this region and then sending the more valuable things like knowledge and luxury to the capital region. I guess they're getting some kind of bonuses there. Maybe they have a university or something, and they're going to get more out of that than if they kept it in the Dusseldorf region. That looks like how that's going to work. And then finally, we're on to merchants. We're on to the last part of the video, guys. So make sure you've hit that like button if you've stayed this long. Merchants are a special unit obtained by using diplomacy domain power. They can be used in 2 different ways. When sent to a region held by another nation, they can be moved next to the capital city of the region. Deployed merchants generate wealth every turn based on the population of the region they are active. The second, and arguably more interesting, use your merchants to develop vassals. When you found a new region or capture a region from an enemy, your new territory starts as a vassal. Vassals can be converted into full regions, but Millennia does not assume that all your vassals will eventually become regions. Again, this was in one of the early dev diaries about how the map worked and things. It was a little bit confusing, but I think it's made more sense as we've got through these dev diaries. So yeah, it looks like these merchants, you can use them just for some nice trade abroad. You're basically just getting wealth depending on how far you send this unit. If you send it across the map, you're going to get a lot of wealth. I imagine it's obviously scaling on distance and things like that, but you can use them internally to develop vassals. Instead, since every vassal contributes resources every turn, in a lot of cases, it is more effective to focus on building up a select set of regions which are supported by a number of vassals that remain vassals. This is something else they talked about. I believe, if I remember correctly, vassals give you resources, as it says then, and the advantage of it is, although you don't control them directly in a way, they don't require your manpower, I think it was. I would have to look back at the old dev diary. There's been a lot of information through all these, so I don't remember everything off the top of my head, but I believe it was something like they don't require like manpower. They don't drain your nation as much. You don't get as much out of them if you obviously own them directly, but with these being vassals, you can, as it says here, you can have a vassal that just focuses on forestry or something, and they're sending you the resources. You're not having to put as much stuff into it, but you can focus that smaller vassal into just doing one thing really good, and then they're just sending that to your nation basically for kind of a minimal upkeep for you. but you're getting a pretty decent return from it. Vassals expand and develop on their own, which increases the amount they tribute. Population is a primary driver behind this, and as a vassal's population increases, the amount it provides each turn increases too. Each vassal also has a prosperity rating, which is essentially a multiplier on the vassal's base tribute. Getting a developed vassal with a larger population into a range like 300% prosperity can produce sizable income. Yeah, that is pretty crazy, 300% better. And again, this is why you would focus having certain vassals that do certain things, and then they're getting that 300% bonus on what they're providing you. Whereas if you own that region yourself, you probably wouldn't be able to get that out of it. It's why you would have this mixture of vassals and directly owned regions. Merchants can be deployed at your vassals in the same manner as they can do with foreign regions. It takes time for them to increase the prosperity of your vassal, so the choice here is short-term wealth with a foreign nation or longer-term investment from a vassal you wish to build up. So there we go, yeah. Do you want money now? Or do you want to play the long game and have this merchant gradually build up these vassal regions you have and make them better and better, get them up to that 300% prosperity so you can use that in later game and, you know, take advantage of that increased production at that point. And there we go. That is the dev diary for this week, covering a lot of the economy, and coupled with the first economy dev diary they did, I think they've given a pretty good overview of how the economy works. There's some things that I still probably will need to reread or watch some of the videos they've released about it just to get my head fully rounded. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you like how the economy is looking this game? I like the way it's kind of a mix of traditional 4X and then also these like settler kind of settlement building games with different production trees that you can mix and match and choose different trees to go down, or don't go down as many of them, just have like a low tech economy and just go crazy with like cheaper units or something like that and try win a victory that way or something. And then as they say in the closing bit, the base model of your nation has plenty going on, but when you layer in the different ages, the different national spirits, the different approaches, and then obviously the different economies that you can have, the combination is a massive selection of possible strategies that supercharges Millennia's replayability. And again, let me know what you think about that. I agree with that. It seems like Millennia is going to have these different ways you can play the game, and really different ways that you can play the same nation, as we talked about before. So you can play France as like a high-tech nation that's going to win a space race, or through these different strategies, spirits, and different ages, you can have it as a disease-spreading mega nation that just kind of wipes out the world and then takes over and wins. And it's going to be really cool to try out these different approaches and see which ones are successful. I think it's going to be quite hard for them to balance it. That would be the one thing I'm a little bit apprehensive about. I think the balancing is going to be pretty wild to get into a reasonable state with all these different mixtures of different things that you can have. There's obviously different ages and spirits you can mix and match, and kind of different combinations of things, and then different ways you can play the nations, and all these different ways. It's going to be interesting to see how well they can balance it, but I'm impressed with it. I think it's going to look really cool. As always, though, this is where we're going to leave the video for today, so hit that like button if you haven't already. If you are new here, I cover the dev diaries for Millennia, and obviously in the launch to the game, we're going to be doing more coverage. Hopefully get some gameplay before too long and kind of see what this game's like once it comes out. But if that's not enough for you, I also cover Crusader Kings and other historical strategy games on the channel. I do live streams, dev diary coverage for other games, news and discussion videos, all that cool stuff. So make sure to subscribe, but we'll leave it there for today. I'll see you in the next one.